Happily Ever After is one of the best episodes of Season 6. Very little of it takes place on the island, so in this analysis I will mostly focus on the solenoid chamber and what happened there. Everything in this episode takes place within an hour. Zoe and Seamus would drag Desmond all over here to the infirmary and then set up the box outside this section of the Room 23 building, filmed at the old Omega station. Earlier I assumed it was all shot here, near the Hydra facility, due to the walkways, but I was corrected by User Null, who has made this terrific Minecraft map of the island, and that this is actually the side of the Omega building. The Omega station was in real life a naval station and closed down in the 50s. Today it's just an empty building riddled with graffiti. But the Lost production team were here in Season 3 when we went to Room 23. We're back in Season 6, and the film crew created this walkway over here. In an earlier video I also made a mistake in saying there are two generators, this one and this one, but they are likely the same thing. The science team start the test. Simmons goes to the box to check the solenoids. They wind up the generator and Simmons get completely fried. What's going on over here? First of all, what is all this? Lost tosses the term electromagnetism all the time. Electromagnetism is one of the four fundamental forces of nature, alongside gravity, weak force, and strong nuclear force. It generates light and energy. We're surrounded by it on a daily basis. An electromagnet is simply a magnet that is produced by an electric current. In its simple form, you have a coil of wire wrapped around an iron core and connected to a battery. Then you have created an electromagnet. The moving electric charge creates a magnetic field. Lost demonstrates this in this episode with the solenoids. However, the science behind it all on Lost is really questionable. Is it possible to achieve what Widmore did in the solenoid chamber? The field produced by the machine here is not enough to kill Simmons or fry him like that. The fields produced by MRI machines measure between 5,000 and 30,000 Gauss and are often expressed in units of Tesla, each of which is equal to 10,000 Gauss. If you look at the episode, you see that the maximum measure is 200 Gauss, which gives us this dramatic effect. Popular mechanics looked at this scene and concluded with this. In Lost, they're operating at picohertz, very low frequencies that don't cause any damage. Every time somebody gets into an MRI scanner, they're in one of the strongest magnetic fields known to man, about 4 Tesla, Webster says. And that doesn't hurt them. The gauges in the generation station show the magnetic flux, or the strength of the magnetic field, to be 200 Gauss, which equates to 0.02 Tesla. One thing I didn't consider is that it might be much higher than 200 Gauss. It only shows 200 because that's as high as the equipment goes. It kind of reminds me of the TV show Chernobyl.
Yes, 3.6 Rontgen, which, by the way, is not the equivalent of 1 chest X-ray, but rather 400 chest X-rays. That number's been bothering me for a different reason, though. It's also the maximum reading on low-limit dosimeters. They gave us the number they had. I think the true number is much higher. If I'm right, this fireman was holding the equivalent of 4 million chest X-rays in his hand.
So Lost is bending science a little bit, and what we're witnessing is a little bit different. More like dielectric heating, as in a microwave, using electromagnetic radiation. Electromagnetic radiation can be quite harmful, like we see from gamma radiation after a nuclear blast. Lost is combining different fields to create their narrative. In the world of Lost, electromagnetism also has another function that is not rooted in the real world, because of a specific thing: the source. The Darwin Initiative described it as exotic matter. It's alien to us, matter we don't understand, and after messing with it, it emits radiation that can be harmful to pregnant women on the island. It has created various pockets of electromagnetic energy all around the island, and does some exciting things with it. The source can manipulate time and space. It seems to separate consciousness from body. Let's use Man in Black as an example. His body is thrown into the source. He is not burned like Simmons. The atoms in his body are not ripped to pieces. There's actually no effect on his body at all when he's thrown in there, other than him dying. Something else is ripped. His memories, his consciousness or soul, whatever you want to call it, gets separated from his body and therefore creating the monster. In 2007, we are witnessing a very interesting situation in the solenoid chamber, another type of separation of body and mind. It would transport the consciousness of Desmond into the afterlife just for a few seconds. If we want to try to look at the equipment here, to find out how much power is needed to transport you into the source, you'll have no luck. This is not rooted in real science, but it seems like the amount of power here, using Hollywood logic, can ignite the connection between the source, the waves, and the human. Maybe setting things in motion here kinda made a bridge with a much more powerful source, opening a pinhole for Desmond, and Widmer had to bring Desmond to the island to do this test. Setting up the solenoid chamber in LA would not work and would not make this string between the source and the blast of electromagnetism. And Desmond, who survived the discharge, has been exposed to so much already that using the Hollywood logic, he's not affected by it on a physical level. He doesn't get vast radiation burns like the previous guy. Desmond's experience is almost like the Man in Black. However, his consciousness is still separated from his body. It didn't create a smoke monster, but entered the afterlife. And if you believe that the afterlife is a realm inside or related to the source, then his 2007 consciousness traveled to his post-death soul. Unlike the other situations we've seen with Desmond, he's not an active protagonist here. His 2007 self is hidden behind his other post-death self. A man who likely lived a very long life, a man who grew old, but looks like this in this 2004 reality that the characters created. And his 2007 soul is not thrown back to the real world until he's activated by the touch of love. This causes him to faint, therefore retreating back to an unconscious body, which lets his 2007 consciousness retreat back to his own body on the island. He wakes up and learns he was out for a few seconds. The showrunner stated that they were inspired by the series finale of Star Trek The Next Generation when they wrote The Constant. I wonder if they were inspired by another Star Trek episode when creating this episode, or possibly Flashes Before Your Eyes, namely the episode The Inner Light, where an energy beam is blasted at Captain Jean-Luc Picard and he wakes up as a scientist on a different planet. He ends up spending 40 years here, growing old, and then wakes up on the ship again.
How long? 25 minutes. 5 minutes.
The activation by the touch is what beams 2007 Desmond back to his body, but it's not the only activation happening here. There's also those that came from memories. Charlie's hand on the window brings back memories of Desmond's life on the island. Personally, I like to view the inner core of the source as a data bank of memories, the past and the future, life and death, the entire cycle of our characters. But there's another activator, which ties with the more scientific aspect of Lost. When Desmond is put inside the MRI, that is an electromagnet. So in the same vein as the solenoid chamber, it opens up Desmond's consciousness and he sees flashes of his life with Penny. I love that the MRI was used here, especially because, like Popular Mechanics said, it's a very powerful electromagnet, but also because it ties back to an old theory from way back in season 1, this scene from Born to Run. Did you catch it? It's a typo when Kate runs past the sign Magnetic Resonance Imagining instead of Magnetic Resonance Imaging. People were theorizing on the forums whether or not the entire show existed in someone's head, that this was a clue that we're not dealing with science, like in this case medical imaging, the visual representation of the function of some organs or tissue, but more about the thoughts and memories. This is a very interesting thing in the Flash Sideways, that the characters are not made out of flesh and bone here, but created through the shared memories of each other, and we're drawn to each other like magnets and metal through shared memories and the love for each other. So we've had the memory activator through a similar event, the MRI, and the third one is the touch of love. The power of love is a very common trope in fiction, where a kiss or a touch can have transformative and important powers. One of my favorite instances, which also bears a similarity to how it's used in this episode, comes from WALL-E, which, spoiler alert, if you for some reason haven't seen it, skip to this part. Eve has to replace a lot of his components, including his memory. It's wiped clean. He's basically like Saeed in Season 6, no emotion. However, it is the electric spark, the power of love, that makes Wally remember Eve. That the memories and emotions of those you have closest can still be brought back through an act of love.
Eva?
We see it in old and new stories, and those moments are heartwarming. Or in very hard sci-fi stories, sometimes love is the answer.
Love is the one thing we're capable of perceiving that transcends dimensions of time and space.
All of this tells us that Lost doesn't operate on strict science. The episode had the perfect opportunity to follow on the same episodic footsteps as its predecessor. You have the constant, you have the variable, and people assumed that the next Desmond or Daniel episode would be called The Equation, but instead it takes cues from fairy tales, happily ever after, and the power of love is so ever present in fairy tales. This episode toys with some of the scientific ideas, but there's still a lot of fantasy, folklore, and religion in this episode. I know that some fans dislike that, and maybe I wanted a little bit more sci-fi in Season 6, but I honestly think Lost had a nice blend of everything.
Hi.
Desmond wakes up. When they take him out, they are instructed to bring him back. Saeed comes out of the jungle. He kills one guy, lets Zoe escape and takes Desmond. Next week will be a bonus episode. We're doing something slightly different. It will be a bonus episode about the time frame on the island between 2005 and 2007 that I've called The Other 1048 Days, which probably could have been an episode in Season 6 about Claire. But that's not all of it. We're going beyond. We're also going to explore the backstory of Ilana. Get ready for a female-centric episode next week.